Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Adam. I guess we'll launch straight in, and as part of this process, I tried to work out what it was that would encompass what we're trying to do in the north and what's important. So, I guess what I came up with this is what we're trying to do in the north is we're trying to manipulate a perennial plant to become an annual in a climate where it has all the ingredients available to it to become a perennial and perenniate. So that is, if you give cotton plant the chance in Northern Australia, it will become a tree and will not be productive for you. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. It's a pretty broad topic given the situation we're in at the moment in trying to establish an industry. So I tried to pick out what I thought was some of the most important stuff, but we'll see how we go. How we're here now is through the advancement of Bollgard technology. So GM technology has enabled us to grow cotton in Northern Australia again because it allows us to plant in an ideal planting window. So that pest there is Spodopterotura, or cluster caterpillar, which previously had an impact on the industry planting in early times of the year, so January, February, which would limit production. So Bollgard 3 has enabled us to plant earlier and take advantage of better yield conditions. So what's the potential? What's going on up there at the moment? So trial results around the Ord and across the north currently showing that yields can be achieved comparable to industry averages in temperate Australia. Quality results have been fantastic. We're producing some excellent cotton up there. Commercial trials from Kununurra in the west through to the Gulf in the east, as well as the Northern Territory. Cottonseed as a protein source for the northern pastoral industry is a key outcome and a real benefit for the north as a whole, and that combination of industries working together for each other's benefit is something that is a real cornerstone to development of the north in the future. But challenges, we're currently no cotton gin, so for those of you that are heading to Dalby on the tour this week, we'll actually see our cotton being ginned out there. So 3,500 kilometre journey, it's pretty well travelled cotton. So I guess the focus for what we're doing now, and part of my research around the world and our trials up in Kununurra has divided into a couple of areas. So first is the in-crop management. So the decision matrix around the tools you have available to influence the plant to behave as an annual, so to keep it in check and make sure that it's productive on an annual basis, and how all those combine with the weather. So how you tweak your nitrogen to keep the plant in check, how you use plant growth regulants given the weather forecasts, etc. The second one, and probably more importantly, is area-wide management. So biosecurity and best management practice. Given that the plant will grow year-round, crop destruction and making sure we provide a break in the year where there's no cotton around to act as a pest host is exceptionally important. That'll spin off to a few other things, and anyone involved in the cotton industry is aware that there's a resistant management plan for the Bollgard technology. So it's essentially just working off the back of that. Funnily enough, it's all about risk mitigation. So making sure that, especially in these early stages, that we're doing everything possible to protect our investment and make sure we get good outcomes from that. So there's certainty going forward. So trying to establish a way forward and an operating base that we have confidence in, and can replicate that across bigger and bigger areas. So in setting out on this journey, it was pushed towards Brazil. It's probably the most climatically similar area in the world for Northern Australian cropping, despite not quite having enough rainfall compared to them. But I was hosted by Eduardo Kawakami of TMG, who was a contact I received from Stephen Yates of the CSIRO. And Eduardo was fantastic. I spent 10 days with him and his team travelling around Brazil. And Eduardo loves pulling out cotton plants everywhere we go. I'm surprised he's allowed on some of the places. But it started to make a bit of sense as we got into it as to why. And one thing I would really like you to focus on there is the architecture of the plant. And you see all the fruit at the top, and that's a key key learning I found, and we'll explain that in a bit of detail going forward. But Eduardo hit me up on day one. We were travelling around out in a cotton field, and he said, everyone wants to know the cake mix, the tropical recipe for growing cotton in the tropics. And I thought, you beauty, ripped out the notebook and report will be done here. And he followed it up with, it doesn't exist. So there was no carnival for Luke. We spent the next 10 days looking at cotton. So it really was the light bulb moment, and that key point in time where you go, right, this is what's important. And what we found in Brazil, a key point, Eduardo spoke a lot about this, there's no rule book or playbook that you can follow day by day, year by year, month by month, and seek to implement that all the time. You will not be able to replicate those results. So be in the crop, read it, see what the weather forecast has done, so know your system, know your crop, try and understand what the crop is telling you and where it's pointing you, balance that with the forward forecast and move forward. And the other one was top crop. Top crop, top crop, top crop. A lot of Australian producers really struggle with the concept of tall cotton. They don't understand it, it looks weird and it's a bit odd, but in Brazil it's a non-issue. They're really focused on letting the plant do what it wants to do and sort of tweaking it so that they get production out of that, and that is the top crop. But read it is again the consistent message. So this is some of our 2018 crop, and essentially is just a classic example of not reading the crop properly. So it was exceptionally hot, clear sunny days, crop was flying along, had a full complement of nutrition, good moisture. Very hot though, so conventional wisdom suggested keep the plant cool so it continues to do what it wants, but it didn't have the plant load on it, it didn't have the fruit load, that would allow the plant to keep itself in check. So it wasn't reading the plant properly. Kept the water up to it, and 20 days later, that's what it looks like. So again, given the opportunity, cotton will perenniate and become a tree if you give it a chance. So read the crop and know how to sort of make an assessment on what it's going to do in the future, what it's likely to do and what it needs. So we do this by assessing the canopy, the roots, retention, and balance that with the forecast. So what's the canopy up to, how much fruit have you got on the plant, what's the root system like, how vigorous it is, and what's the forecast likely to do in the next 7 days, given it's pretty variable in the north, and most farmers would appreciate making decisions off what the bomb tells you. But balance all that together and make a decision on where the crop's going. On the crop height issue, non-event in Brazil, so they're pretty happy with a crop that's 1.3 metres tall. 1.5 is okay, it's a bit tall, but who cares? It's Brazil, go have a barbecue, move on. Bom Futuro, one of the biggest ag companies in the world, and certainly the biggest cotton producer over there. One of their farms right up in the north of Brazil, towards the Amazon. 2 litres of PIX across the crop, so PIX being a plant growth regulant, also used in Australia, but used in 8 applications. So little bits at each application. So just sort of little spattering. Instead of trying to do massive corrections of the crop, try and tweak it just to do what's required at the time. Also 10 fungicides and 8 insecticides. So they've got other issues there. So when the plant's going across, it's much easier to sort of throw a bit of plant reg in there at the same time and go with that. But a point that Paul Grundy of QDAF makes is that when you're using plant growth reg, you're using it for the future, not what the crop's doing now. So that comes back to that, assessing where the crop's going to go, where's it telling you what it wants to do, and making a decision like that and using PIX as a tool for that. Because PIX can also be the problem. So plant on the left, no PIX supplied during the season, 23 nodes, 20 bowls, heavy program on the right, trying to keep that plant in check. So any cotton growers in the room that think, I'll do better, I'll be able to get yield and grow a short plant, that's the result of that. So costs more money for a lower outcome. So your margin is smashed to pieces. So the top crop. farming by ear. There was 4 small bowls below where I cut that plant off. Huge load on top of it. It's essentially the agronomist in Kununurra, Penny Goldsmith, calls it lollipop cotton. So it's just a stick with all the fruit up the top. So it seems odd, but that's the sort of system we're working in, and it works. Certainly get asked, it won't pick cleanly. And this is some cotton in Brazil, and I've been told I'm not a good reference point for tall cotton, but I've stood next to it. I'm just taller than the head on a picker, so it's still valid, I think. But exceptionally clean job being done in there in Brazil, and that's what we found in the ord as well. So it's certainly not an issue that we need to be concerned with. Some of the plants we found in Kununurra, so this is the 2019 crop, or some of that we've had in Kununurra, planted middle of January. And that plant on the left looks pretty scary. It's certainly a bit of photographic effect, but you can again see the height and all that crop up the top. And against the plant on the 2 plants on the right, so that same tall plant against one of the other varieties that is more determinant type. So what happened was the crop's gone through an exceptional amount of heat and some wet conditions. One variety's adapted to those conditions, and one variety hasn't. So the determinant variety has done what it thought it needs to do, so it's held onto its fruit, stayed short, stayed compact, but as a result has much smaller fruit. So those 2 plants actually have the same fruit load. So there's I think from memory there was 24 bowls on each of those plants, but with the hindsight we have now after picking and getting our genuine result back, so there was nearly a 2 bale difference per hectare. So today's pricing, that's about $1,000 a hectare, just in the varietal differences there. But same variety, planted 2 different dates. So it's again, that back to Eduardo's point about the cake mix not being there. You can't assume that what worked for a mid-January plant can be replicated when that crop was planted at the end of February. So there are 2 very different scenarios there, and making sure we read the crop, read the weather conditions, and just balance what it's telling us at the time instead of being rigid in our attempt to manage it for an outcome. But one of the I guess the real driver of this in Northern Australia is the extremity of variation that we get up there. So this is our average maximum and minimum temperatures for the growing season. When you look at it like that, it looks very pleasant. You sort of wonder what we carry on about up there. But when we looked at our analysis of the season this year, Paul Grundy said essentially a cotton plant, or any plant for that matter, is like a person. If you feels like temperature, so if it's hot and it's humid and you can't transpire, you start to overheat. So what I went through and did was do an analysis of the feels like temperature for the growing season this year. So the relative humidity combined with the maximum temperature, and the black line being a 10-day moving average of that measure. It's April before we drop below 40 degrees. So the plant has gone through this enormous stress load. It's an actual wonder we get a result at all, to be honest. Somewhere there, late February, we were irrigating as well. So coupled with what the plant's going through, try and keep in mind that at some point in time you're probably going to have to get staff to go out in those conditions and start siphons. So that's probably something to keep in mind, and how you set your farm up in different locations. Not just the temperature, but the rainfall, certainly extreme. The red lines there, the average for that sort of 2-week period that can be experienced. But start to have a look at the bars through the wet season there, like the variation of extreme points of difference there. So it's something in your planning that you need to keep in mind, because how do you make a decision given those variations can be so extreme? How do you use your tools if the forecast says that you could get between 70 and 350 millimetres of rain next week? The wettest day I've seen in Kununurra had a forecast of 20 to 30 millimetres of rain. We had 240. It's something you can't plan for, but you need to use those measures again: the roots, retention, canopy, and the forecast and make a decision based on that. So I've been telling growers in the Ord that you sort of need to assess what's happening since your last management intervention, make a plan based on your roots retention canopy and the forecast, and implement it, and have a review date if that forecast or anything changes in that, so that you actually you can live and manage instead of bouncing around on these possible scenarios. When it starts raining at 2 a.m. on Thursday night, you've got your next course of action based on what that means for the crop, because you've already assessed where it's going to go given that situation, and move on. So area-wide management, why is it important? Boll weevil doesn't exist in Australia, but is a massive, massive problem in Brazil. So we went to one farm that had averaged 19 sprays for the season, 27 in some hotspots. So when the industry in the Ord collapsed in the 60s, 70s, they were spraying about 19 times for Heliothis. But so just to put a bit of context around the sort of problem they've got over there at the moment. The US, on the other hand, and needs pointing out that Brazil has no regulation around when planting can commence, when it has to be finished, what chemicals can be used and their use. So it's essentially a free-for-all. So you can have cotton planted in December and they'll be still planting in March or April. So you're reaching a point where there is nearly cotton in the ground for 10 to 11 months of the year. So it's just part of the exacerbation of their problems. But the US, on the other hand, has nearly completely eradicated boll weevil from the cotton-growing regions there on the continent. So how they went about that was a targeted, coordinated approach across the whole industry. Everyone had buy-in, and they do that. That's a monitoring trap in Alabama, and still, there's been no boll weevil in Alabama for decades, but they still have a monitoring program and make sure that they're on top of that. And Bill Heinrich, who was a cotton farmer out on the panhandle of Texas, said he was heavily involved when they did in Texas and drove that sucker back to Mexico. But he made the point that he really will make sure, whilever he's around, that boll weevil program is front of mind. They keep it out because the situation, every 3 days they were spraying, there were planes going everywhere spraying cotton for boll weevil to eradicate it. They will never have the social licence to be able to conduct that again. There is too many people viewing agriculture to be able to see planes flying around every 3 days without a consequence. It just won't happen. So the issue for Northern Australia and one of those pests that can be our problem is mealybug. So this is actually the Ord's gift to Australia. It was first picked up there in Kununurra, and is sort of moving its way through Queensland and south. But those photos are from the 2018-19 wet season in Kununurra on volunteer cotton plants. So any plant we had surviving over the wet season had mealybug on it, and there's a strip there on the head ditch of one of our fields. Quite a simple problem. New guy on the plough, didn't close out his headlands very well, wasn't picked up when we were doing the job, started getting wet, and back came those returns. So we couldn't control that, given what I was saying earlier about the climatic conditions. So the plant's trying to grow and has the ability to grow that vigorously that we couldn't control it with herbicide. So and they're heavy rates of those herbicides. So we were fortunate that we were able to get in there with some paraquat, diquat, and actually take care of those plants. But if they were sort of spattered all through that field, we had a massive problem. Or even worse, that field was planted back to cotton the following year. So while we're managing under the same resistant management plan with a few tweaks that the rest of the industry works on for Bollgard, there's more to it than that for Northern Australia. So crop destruction needs to be a real focus of our resistance management, and it's more than just the Bollgard or Roundup resistance management, because the more time the plants are in the ground, the harder it is going forward for our industry. I guess this is more than just on farm. And I guess how I try and describe it to farmers now is that crop destruction will be the most important operation that you do for next year's crop. So thinking months and months ahead, focusing on that end of season, and you've just grown your crop all year, and now I'm telling you that you really need to focus on something after harvest, because that's what's going to drive your profitability and your sustainability going into the next year. So, couple of current threats. So, fall armyworm has been picked up in Indonesia, moving its way through. It's been come through Africa, India, making its way through Indo. It's not that far away from the north, so it's certainly an issue. Cotton blue disease picked up in Timor. Fortunately, we have some very, very smart people in our industry, and cotton blue disease and fall armyworm are both on the radar. The Northern Quarantine inspection, keeping an eye out for fall armyworm. CRDC is already working on cotton blue disease, so it's. I hope that it goes without saying that biosecurity needs to be front of mind for all producers and all industries. So recommendations, we need continued focus on R&D and making sure that focus is about helping growers make commercial decisions to minimise their risk. Development or expansion of the Myo BMP program that Cotton Australia runs, or the industry runs, and specific to Northern Australia and how it's managed. Integrate the guidelines of best management practice, such as crop destruction, into the accreditation that every grower must do for their Bollgard 3 accreditation before you can start growing cotton. Actually be signed off and understand that, because once you start growing and you're part of our industry, you need to have buy-in to protecting it and make sure it's sustainable. Identification and rating of pests and disease that are of current threat, like fall armyworm, and making sure we have strategies in place that when it turns up, because that's the most likely scenario, not if, we have clear plan on how to manage that. We don't want to be beholden to state jurisdictions or national jurisdictions on how that pest or that outbreak gets managed, whatever it may be. Northern Australia is very unique, but divided into three parts, and it needs to be viewed as one area as opposed to three separate jurisdictions. If anyone would like to further discuss the abolition of the states this afternoon, we can talk about that, but in the meantime, and certainly on the ground, the growers are working together and making sure that everybody's across the issues and we're progressing forward together. Few thank yous. Nuffield Australia, I think it goes without saying, exceptional opportunity, and encourage anyone to get involved. My employer, Kai. The Ord farming community has given me a great deal of opportunity in my time there, so I thank them for that. But also Steve Yates and Paul Grundy, who have certainly driven and helped out with a lot of the research to get us to this point in time in a cotton industry in Kununurra, and they'll be sort of key drivers across the north. The hosts around the world, the hospitality is certainly exceptional. My sponsors, Cotton Australia and the Cotton Research and Development Corporation. My fiancée, Kitty, for her support throughout this whole process. It's certainly, you lean pretty hard on those close to you going through this, so I thank her for that. And just finally, my family has been involved in the cotton industry for a very long time and has given us exceptional opportunity over the years, so I'm certainly very excited to be back involved in cotton and able to give back to the industry on the other side of the country. Thank you.